Okay, you're saying that there will remain some real issues irrespective of whether this is going to be over. But let me go to Charu Lata Hogg. My question is, an end to the civil war, is this going to provide the government with more leverage to start social development programs, prosperity, because the country for the last 4 decades was almost standstill just because of this situation?
Well, this government came to power on a populist agenda. It also came to power on a militarist agenda. So if you're talking about social development, the government does not have the finances to engage in infrastructural and social development. It has already gone to the IMF for a bailout. So essentially, the government's military strategy has completely depleted the government's resources. Also, it has a pending investigation into its human rights record by the EU, and it stands to lose. If that investigation succeeds, it stands to lose a special preferential tariff in terms of textiles, which are its primary exports. So, and in a global economic recession, it is not clear how the government is going to generate the finances and how it's going to bolster the economy to really put its country back on track in terms of social development.
So let me talk to Charu about this. What happened, Charu, if the Tamil rebels move to Tamil Nadu in India, where they have huge support, and the area puts more pressure on the Indian government? Are we going to see the same scenario like back in the '87 when the Indians had to interfere because of the pressure from the Tamils?
Despite the domestic constituency in India, the Tamil domestic constituency in South India, the Indian government has no appetite to get involved in Sri Lankan affairs. And also in terms of, movement of the Tamil cadre, the LTT cadre that you're talking about, if the leadership moves to Tamil Nadu, that is we are assuming that the Sri Lankan government will A, let them flee, and B, the Indian government will allow them to enter their territory. Both sides, both the main dominant political parties in South India, the DMK and the AIDMK, have to pledge a certain amount of support for the Tamil population in Sri Lanka because of their political constituencies. But would they be willing to stick their necks out and to put pressure on the central government to actually get involved in negotiations, in political negotiations, or in a military intervention? That is highly unlikely.
And earlier I spoke to Charu Lata Hogg, an expert on Sri Lanka at the foreign affairs think tank Chatham House. She joined me from New Delhi. Ms Hogg, the Sri Lankan army says that 30 civilians have been killed in the past 48 hours, but the rebels claim that it's more like 1,000 civilians. Do we have any idea what the truth is?
Well, I think because the media has been completely removed from the scene and there is no access to independent monitors, the figures will remain disputable. But I would not go with either of the figures. Both figures can be highly exaggerated. What is reliable is that the number of civilian casualties continues to be high, and that is indeed very disturbing.
We're hearing reports that about 80,000 people have fled the war zone. How many people does that mean, or civilians does that mean, are still in the war zone?
Well, the UN spoke about a figure of about anywhere between 100 to 150,000 in the middle of April. And if you assume 80,000 people have left the war zone, then, we're talking about anywhere between 50 to 60,000 people who are still in a very small conflict area. By any stretch, this is a very high number because the area we're talking about is a very, very small, shrinking conflict zones, which is coming under indiscriminate and heavy shelling by the Sri Lankan military, and these people are being used as human shields by the LTTE.
The Red Cross says that the situation is nothing short of catastrophic for civilians there. Tell us more about what they're facing.
The situation is is horrendous on many folds. You know, on one level, you're talking about civilians who have been without adequate food or medicines or even water for about 3 months now, holed up inside bunkers, avoiding shells, and those who manage to come out of bunkers do not make it alive. We're talking about women, children, elderly, infirm, you know, a vulnerable lot of people. Those who do manage to escape and come out of this shelling area and out of the conflict zone and make it to the other side, so as to say, are then taken into heavily militarized, human rights organizations term detention camps, and the government calls transit camps. But these camps they have barbed wires. Again, the access of humanitarian agencies and international agencies is very limited. Medical supplies are very limited. The hospitals who are sheltering and taking care of the injured and wounded do not have adequate supplies. They do not have anesthetics, pain medication. We're talking about very, very dire conditions here for those who are injured and wounded. Also, on the emotional level, it's been a very traumatic experience for thousands of people who fled the conflict zones. They're not being allowed to take shelter with host families. They're not being allowed access to members of their family who may be in different camps. According to any international standards which apply to displaced persons, this is very, very galling.
You mentioned earlier that independent observers haven't had access to the conflict zone, and that includes the media, UN and other aid agencies. Why is that? Why is the Sri Lankan government not allowing it?
Since the beginning, since virtually 2006, when the government decided to unleash its military agenda and decided that it would resolve this conflict through fighting, it has been very, very careful about allowing international access. And that is because of a widespread, it's because of various reasons, but predominantly it's because of a widespread belief in Sri Lanka that anybody who reports on the conflict or even reports on a factual side of the conflict is a traitor or is supportive of the LTTE. So they have been, therefore the media has come under attack not just in the conflict area but outside. And within the conflict area, the presumption is that the government has a lot to hide in terms of the violations of rules of war, in terms of violations of international humanitarian law. But let's not forget that the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam, the Tamil Tigers, are no innocent party to this conflict. You know, when they ruled over swathes of territory in the north and east, there was no free media in these areas. So this is nothing new for ordinary Tamil civilians in Sri Lanka. Their fate has so far, their misery the stories of their misery have not been told in reality for a very long time.
Until 2006, the Tamil Tigers controlled loosely about a third of Sri Lanka. They've obviously lost then a lot of ground in a relatively short time. Why has that happened?
They've lost all their territory. So in a sense, you're looking at the virtual demise of the LTTE as a conventional force. Why has that happened? For various reasons, one starting which is the fact that the government of Mahinda Rajapaksa got elected on the basis of resolving this conflict through a military campaign. He had the mandate of people to resolve this through military means. And this was unanimous. It has never been so in Sri Lanka before. So the Tamil Tigers in that sense faced a formidable force. The Sri Lankan military has also received a lot of support, a lot of military hardware from the Chinese government, from the Pakistani government, and they have intrinsically put all their resources into fighting this military campaign. The Sri Lankan economy is in a dire state because it is a war economy, but they have achieved what they set out to achieve. The LTTE, on the other hand, because of their sort of deplorable human rights practices, which included child recruitment, which included extortion of the diaspora internationally, have been proscribed in more and more countries. Their funding and their support has increased increasingly come under scrutiny. You know, in 2006, the EU banned them, and that was a huge blow to the LTTE. And beyond that, you know, the LTTE has faced a lot of scrutiny in terms of its on the international seas, because of Indian intelligence, because of US intelligence. So it has been under pressure in terms of its own fundraising, in terms of its arms procurement, and the Sri Lankan government, on the other hand, has been bolstered in its war efforts because it has pumped in more resources into its military campaign.